Greetings. Don't mind me, just getting a quick beverage. I'm just gonna. Love that sound. Oh man, it's glorious. Glorious. Is mine? Oh, I thought my phone was upside down for a minute. Quick ASMR, real quick. That is a wonderful sound. Okay, so while that finishes fizzing. Anyway, today's topic I want to talk about for today's video and for this week's video. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And also make sure to hit the notification bell. That way you can get weekly notifications about me when I upload and when I try to keep my typical weekly upload schedule. I'm trying to maintain it as much as possible. That way I can get content out as best as I can and as more often as I can. And I want to try and stick to this schedule. So that way when I have future viewers, they know that there's going to be a video every week. Besides that, let's get into today's topic. And today's topic is going to be, well, why games flop after years of long development. Now, what made me want to make a video about this is that I've noticed a certain trend now, specifically in the gaming industry. I've noticed there's this typical thing going on. You have games that have been in development for either 2 years, 3 years, games that have been in development for months, or games that have been in development for a decade, 7 years, or even past a decade. But why is it some of these games that have been in development for years, like 7 to about 10, flopping? What happens? What caused the game to do bad? What caused it to fail? What caused it to overall have a downfall? Right? And today we're going to be discussing that. And the games that we're going to be discussing today are going to be Final Fantasy 15, RD2, and of course the very controversial Cyberpunk 2077. I believe these games are good examples of what it means to have long development. Final Fantasy 15 took 10 years to make. Cyberpunk 2077 took 7 years to make. It started out in 2013 being announced by a specific trailer that caught everyone by surprise, and of course made its debut last year of December. I want to say it was the 18th. And then we have RD2, which came out, I believe, in 2018, which to a certain extent did well narratively wise, but overall there is some things lacking. I feel like the first thing that I'm going to start with is going to be Final Fantasy 17. Now, before I begin and get into this, I'm going to announce that how I'm going to go about critiquing these games and explaining the certain things that makes them what they are. I'm going to touch upon these specific topics for each individual game. I'm going to touch upon gameplay, story, graphics, mechanics, and of course open world experience. And also going to explain the backstory behind the development, how long it took, what problems they possibly went through, and what could have caused the game to do bad. So by all means, let's begin with Final Fantasy 15. So Final Fantasy 15 has been in development for at least 10 years. The game, I think, originally came out in the year 2016. That was at least a good 5 years ago. Quite some time. I feel pretty old saying this. And one thing I have to say about it, right, when it comes to Final Fantasy, excuse me, pouring the last of my root beer. One thing I have to say about Final Fantasy 15 was the fact that I personally heavily enjoyed the game. But the game went through many changes. When the game was first announced, I'm not sure many people remember this, but the game was actually supposed to be about this. It was the idea of basically Final Fantasy taking this sort of idea of Noctis not being a prince, but being the son of a powerful crime boss in this city. And he had access to these specific powers where he could... Basically, it was the same thing that Final Fantasy was, where Noctis had access to these powers and these abilities and all this type of stuff. All he was basically the son of a crime boss. And Lunafreya, his so-called love that he was basically going after in Final Fantasy 15, the current one, that was supposed to be someone who was like the opposite of his world and would basically make him have some confliction towards his current livelihood. That idea eventually got scratched. Not many people know this, right? But apparently there were two directors that basically were exchanged. The first director was one who was working on the whole idea of Noctis being the son of a crime boss. Then the second director came upon that, and then it kind of changed, and it became this whole, Noctis is the prince, and he's the chosen one, and he's the king of kings, and he's the one that's going to save the world from the demon plague. That was the whole idea, right? And this game, I'm telling you, this game went through 10 years of development, right? 10 years. Now, one thing I want to say, and I don't exactly know why there was a certain exchange between directors. I don't know why it changed that. I'm not sure the exact reason what it was, but oh, that's good. That's great. The exact reason for, I think, what really made Final Fantasy somewhat flop in a certain way, specifically this one, 15, I think it was for one reason. This was a Final Fantasy 15, the first one that was designed to basically go out of its hardcore fan base into new audiences. Once you first open up to the game immediately announces that this is a Final Fantasy 15 game for people who are new to the series, who are first-time players. Let's be honest here. Final Fantasy 15, but the games before those are all JRPGs, turn-based JRPGs, and these games were strategy games, right? You had your typical you had your own team, you get to level up your team, each one has their own attribute and abilities and stats and health and all this type of stuff, and it was basically your job to manage and make your way through the world. But there was a certain problem with this because you had new people coming in for the Final Fantasy, and because you had hardcore fans that weren't used to a game design like this. You had conflicting sides. You had some people saying the game was too hard, and you had some people saying the game was too easy. Here's my thing. As a person that has never played a Final Fantasy 15 game, at least before this one, I mean, I did play the demo for Final Fantasy 13, which was the Return of Lightning. That series, I think it did decently well. I played that once, didn't really care for it. After playing 15, I heavily enjoyed it. I was super high for 15. I could not wait after seeing gameplay footage and how it was being done and what they were doing. After seeing how the world was designed and how you could travel and how there's open world and how there is RPG mechanics and how you can do all these things, how you could upgrade Noctis, his friends, along with Prompto, Gladius, Ignis, and how the story developed and how it developed each character. The main problem that really messed up Final Fantasy wasn't just the divide between hardcore fans and new ones, but story. Here's the thing. If you play Final Fantasy 15, the game by itself, alone, right? The problem was the fact that you had to watch both the movie, which was Final Fantasy 15 King's Glaive, and the short anime series to have a good, solid understanding of what was going on in the world. A&W is amazing. And because of this, you had a lot of fans who basically didn't even know there was a movie that came out. Final Fantasy 15 King's Glaive came out originally in the East and did well in the East, but when it came out in the West, not many people heard about it. It didn't really do well. People thought it was okay. In my opinion, the CGI movie was pretty good. When I watched it, when I watched the movie, I'm not saying the movie was a masterpiece or was great. It was mediocre at best. But what it was trying to do was just tell the story. You remember that scene, basically, when you find out, and of course I'm going to talk about spoilers in all these games. I want to make that I want to make that clear. Do you remember that scene where Noctis finds out his father's died and that basically Insomnia has been invaded and that the entire kingdom has fallen down? Final Fantasy 15 King's Glaive basically explains what happened and how Insomnia fell from the inside when Niflheim went to invade it. And it basically takes place with the main character being Nyx, who is voiced by Aaron Paul. And this movie actually has a pretty good, well-standing cast. You have Aaron Paul, who plays Nyx, the main character. You have, I think, the man that played Boromir from Lord of the Rings and played, I think, Ned Stark from Game of Thrones. He plays King Regis, and you have Lena Headey, who is the narrator in the beginning, which I was surprised. So they had a pretty strong, solid Hollywood cast, but that doesn't mean that it was going to necessarily carry the movie to be something great. So basically, the movie just basically shows how Nyx is, he's part of the King's Glaive, this elite group of the Royal Guard who are anointed with the King's power and who have the ability to have their own weapons that they can throw and teleport to and do magic and all these things that they can do, right? And eventually, of course, the kingdom is eventually attacked by Niflheim. And upon this, when they are attacked, King Regis has died, and Nyx sacrifices himself by taking the ring, which can only be used by a Lucian. Anyone that takes the ring is basically chosen or judged by the past kings and is deemed worthy. If they are not deemed worthy, then they themselves will basically have to pay a price, whether if it's their life or they might have to lose their limb. And for those of you that are not aware, those who wear the ring and are worthy of it and are basically are able to receive its power. If you are not a Lucian, you must sacrifice yourself, whether if it's your own life or a piece of yourself. I believe Lunafreya's brother lost his arm, and I believe Ignis in one of the DLCs lost his sight. That's how he was able to lose his sight when they went to Lunafreya, where she was, in their fantastical Italian city. So that is the whole main premise behind Kingsglaive Final Fantasy. Then you have the mini anime series, which was about 5 episodes long, and it basically, the mini anime series kind of sets up the origin of each person in Noctis's group. That sets up the origin for Ignis, Gladius, and Prompto. And for one thing, it kind of sets up Prompto. I kind of enjoyed Prompto's origin. Prompto's origin, I think, was nice. Prompto was a kid who basically, he was fat originally. He was a fat kid, didn't really have many friends, and he wanted to basically get in shape. You know, he was tired of being fat, overweight, you know, so he got in shape, started running, eating healthy. You know, that's why he is the way he is. And if you play the game, there's actually certain nods back to, there's callbacks to the anime, where Prompto kind of wishes he had a high metabolism or didn't have to worry about having to eat so healthy as much. I think if you play the game and you go to a crow's nest, which is like this little burger, it's a diner shop in the world of Final Fantasy 15, Ignis actually calls back to the fact like, you shouldn't go there, Prompto, unless you want to gain weight again. Basically, he's referencing back to when Prompto used to be fat and how you should watch what he eats, which is a good callback. But the problem with this game is that it doesn't make a lot of callbacks, and it makes a few callbacks to certain other mediums that they use to tell the story. And because of that, it kind of it fails. It fails a lot because you have people that are wondering, what is he talking about that? What is that being said? How does this make sense? There are some people that didn't necessarily understand what was going on in the story, and it led the story to be kind of lackluster. Things were being filled in as well, and it came off as dry, which is understandable. And each character in their own way does have their own little personality. Noctis, sadly, is the way they set up Noctis in the anime is quite typical. He's your typical edgy anime protagonist who lost his mother at a young age, has daddy issues, and of course is struggling with basically the responsibility of being this so-called chosen one, or as they call it, he is the king of kings, the one that would be, they call him the chosen king, the one to basically rid the world of all demons and bring it to peace and light and all this type of stuff. But the problem was the fact that there were too many gaps and there were too many things that a person had to get involved in to truly learn the story. Not only that, if you think about it, Final Fantasy 15 as a whole, as a story, it brought its cast together through certain mini little DLCs, which were about $5. And these DLCs, I enjoyed them heavily. There's a DLC for Prompto, a DLC for Gladius, and a DLC for Ignis. And each one kind of explained their own little side story. There's certain parts in the main story where there's gaps where there's a certain part in the story where basically Gladius kind of disappears and you don't really know where he goes. That confuses a lot of people. Then they have the Gladio DLC where basically he explains he went to like this ancient old warrior named Gilgamesh who taught him how to be a stronger, better warrior so that way he could protect Noctis. And you have Prompto who had his own personal story where he went missing in the middle, and Prompto basically had to confront the fact that he himself is half demon and he's a product of a cloning situation where basically majority of the Magitech soldiers are just basically cloned humans of the king mixed with demons to become their own personal soldiers. And then you have Ignis, who sacrificed his eyesight in order to save Noctis from Ardyn, the so-called villain of the game. Now, that is story for the game of Final Fantasy 15. Now that I've checked off story, let's talk about gameplay. Gameplay or otherwise, I heavily enjoyed gameplay for Final Fantasy 15. I heavily enjoyed it. I believe it was great. It was fun. It was fluid. It was very different. One thing that really caught my eye about this game, let me adjust my posture. Oh my goodness. My back. Okay, that's much better. Okay, here we go. One thing that really caught my eye when it came to Final Fantasy 15 was the gameplay. It was different. It was unique. It was something I wasn't used to. I mean, I never thought of the concept of someone throwing a sword and then teleporting to that sword and doing a certain attack. And one thing I love about the game is that it's fluid. It's the gameplay mechanics are well designed. You can do team attacks with your teammates, with like Gladio, Prompto, Ignis. You can have your teammates perform certain attacks. You can upgrade your teammates, level them up. You can give your teammates certain weapons. And not only that, you could also basically go into dungeons and look for, and basically when you're in these dungeons you can get loot, new weapons, broken weapons. In fact, now we're going to now discuss one thing that I think I really wanted to discuss was the fact of this. In my first gameplay, my first actual playthrough of Final Fantasy 15, I just actually started replaying it. I realized to myself, Final Fantasy 15 to a certain extent is too easy. Yes, and I can admit, when I first played the game versus when I play it now, when the game first came out, the game was, yes, very much easy. I originally had beaten the game around level 40 to 42, and I think the required level for the last mission was about 50 to about 60. Hold up, I can actually, let's see. Just to make this more clear, let's see here. Let me check the data log on my computer. Let's see, what is the required level for the final mission. Final Fantasy. That right? That's right. Okay. Final Fantasy 15. Let's see here. So let's see here. If you can. Oh, so it says here, see here. 45 is the game's recommended level. 45. I beat the game at level 40 or 42, and I think a friend of mine beat it even below that. But yeah, but here's the thing, the game is too easy, and I think one thing about it was, when I first played it, I felt the game was long, very long in my opinion. But if you think about it to a certain extent, the game's overall content is a lot more bigger than the story. The story stops about halfway, and one thing I will say about it is the open world. Let me not get to that yet. One thing I will say about it is that when it comes to gameplay mechanics and of course leveling, there is a certain thing. The gameplay mechanics are not complicated. They're not hard and they're not difficult. They're very easy to learn, to master, and to understand. Of course, there is an upgrading system. There is a skill tree. It's called the Ascension when you go to your menu. And the Ascension is basically separated into multiple categories. You have combat, you have teamwork, you have exploration, you have magic, you have what else? You have exploration, and the way you upgrade yourself is through AP points. These AP points are known as Ascension points, and you use these Ascension points to upgrade yourself. I noticed that when looking back, I just started New Game Plus. Yes, Final Fantasy 15 is New Game Plus. I looked back at the game, and I found out to myself that the only tree that I upgraded was combat. Teamwork. I think it was a teamwork tree where basically you could it was a tree where basically you could upgrade your other teammates and get the new abilities and new attacks to have. I mainly upgraded my combat tree, and I barely touched any of the other trees. I touched like some of them, like exploration, a little bit more, but it was mostly a little bit of magic, combat, and teamwork. Everything else kind of just out the way. And I think that's one of the things that really got to it was the fact that when it came to the gameplay mechanics, not many of the other mechanics, you never felt like you had to use many of the certain tools that were given to you. For example, when it came to gameplay, I never found myself using magic a lot. There's 3 forms of magic. There's lightning, fire, and frost. And I did not once. I mean, I think there were times where I did, just because it was something I wanted to like expand my usage of the game mechanics more, but I found myself not using it as much. And I realized to a certain extent was the fact that the game itself, because it's so easy to a certain point, and when I played the game, I did play it on normal. Even on normal, it's quite easy. When I played it on normal, I didn't really have too much of a difficulty. Don't get me wrong, there were times where I had to, of course, get up in higher level, of course, had to increase my stats, of course, had to, get better weapons, typical RPG things to do. But I think the only time when I had really, really heavy difficulty was, I want to say, when it came to the dungeon bosses. For example, if you're before the big update, if you were going to basically try to unlock the other royal arms or go to the other dungeons, like the secret underground dungeons where the lore behind it is the fact that King Regis basically fought these great beasts and slew them away in these powerful underground dungeons throughout the land. You can go into these dungeons and there's like this giant maze where you go around and fight these things and you kill them and you get good loot. Right, I think those dungeons were the only time they got hard, but apparently people said the dungeons, some dungeons specifically, was hard. And apparently one of these dungeons was actually a dungeon that was in chapter 13, where apparently this dungeon was difficult because some of the enemies were hitting too hard, and I wouldn't say that, but apparently this dungeon was difficult for some people. But at the same time, you have this thing. When it came to gameplay, you have people saying that the gameplay was difficult, and you have people saying the gameplay was too easy. Let's be honest. The people that were saying it was easy were the newcomers, people that were the new fans, and people that were saying that the gameplay was difficult or people that were the old fans, people that were used to the typical turn-based JRPG mechanics. Because they had to readjust themselves to a new type of gameplay when it came to Final Fantasy 15, it made them have to rethink things out a little bit and approach things differently. And because of that, they didn't have much of as a good time as other people probably did. I had a great time because I personally believed that some of the encounters and boss fights and just fights in general were fun. They were great. They were well done. And the world was amazing. Now, when it comes to overall gameplay, it's fun, it's well developed, animations are executed very well. I will say this, that when it comes to each different character, I love how the fact you can upgrade each character, and each character on their own, if upgraded well, honestly, if you have a good build for each character, they can handle themselves on their own, not your own. And everything will roll well. And I can honestly say I heavily enjoyed it. And one thing about it, right, Final Fantasy 15, for a game and the scale that it's on, right, and for the development and for the many years it's been in of development, you would think there'd be some bugs. There were no bugs at all. But the main problem was the fans and how they basically experienced the game. Apparently, because the game was so quote unquote difficult, there were many adjustments that were made to this game. For example, if you beat the game, you basically got King Regis' ring, this powerful god ring that could basically one-shot anything. Now, when the game first came out in 2016, when this game specifically first came out, there is the ability where the ring could basically create a black hole, which could basically bend time and space and could one-shot literally anything in the game. Literally anything. Now, before this, you could probably only do this ability once every blue moon. Right, you couldn't do it all the time because for one, it took all of your MP meter, your magical point meter, in one strike. Right. 2 weeks later, after this, after I beat the game when the game came out. I want to say 2 weeks. I want to say about a good month later, there was a patch that was released. They basically nerfed this ring to high hell. It got to a point where basically this ring could one-shot literally anything in the entire game. No matter what, a boss, a story boss, well, I can't say story boss because you can't one-shot the Leviathan when you fight it in where Ludafreya is. But it can one-shot literally anything. Dungeon bosses, royal arm bosses, anything that you came across, this ring could kill it with just the sheer power of bending space and time. Now, when I found this out, there was a boss I was fighting. Do you guys remember the giant turtle? It was like this giant turtle mountainous boss that you had to fight, and the recommended level for this boss was apparently 99. Now I looked it up. The max level right now, Final Fantasy 15, is 120. I'm 64, and I'm still doing pretty well. Honestly, I don't know if you have to get to 120 if you want to be overpowered God, because I'm 64 and I'm already overpowered God. So I don't think there's any need for that. But I will say this, right? This ring completely shifted the gameplay entirely. Because people said the gameplay was either too hard or too easy, they wanted to make it even easier, because you had more people saying the gameplay was hard. And that was most of the hardcore fans who were saying the gameplay was too difficult because it was a different Final Fantasy. So because this one was buffed, I basically went through the entire game destroying, one-shotting, dominating everything in sight. I went to each individual section where I can get all the royal arms, use the ring, one-shotted everything. Okay, went to majority of the dungeons, one-shotted everything. Right, I went to the giant turtle boss. I one-shot. Like, I don't think you guys understand how big this turtle boss actually is. This thing is huge. It's massive, right? And this thing was difficult. I won't say, that was the one time where the game did difficult, because I was under level and I didn't have the right things to fight it. But this ring, this ring shifted the tables. It shifted the reality for me. The devs gave me a reality shifter in the palm of my hands, and I just destroyed this turtle immediately. I mean, all I did was basically just hold triangle, and you just see Noctis rise up like the little young god he is, and next thing you know, all space and time just bends, and then you just see this giant turtle just get sucked into this little hole, and then shoop, it's done. And and honestly, I was happy. Because, I'm happy. Here's the thing. At first, I was happy that they made a ring like that so powerful. I was happy because it made the game more fun for me, and I was. But the really sad thing is that apparently this game didn't just get flack for that, right? And I feel like I want to end that there. I've covered gameplay. Let's cover graphics, right? Graphically wise, this game is gorgeous. It's beautiful, well rendered. The place is truly majestic. Insomnia is beautiful. We don't go to Niflheim. I don't think we know what even Niflheim looks like. It's just this mechanized world. Insomnia is beautiful. What Lunafreya is fantastical. Water. It's like their own fantastical version of Italy. That was gorgeous to see. The world in general was just gorgeous and a sight to behold. There are plenty of times where, where you're in your regalia and you're driving through the land and you're just looking around, admiring the sights, seeing the giant like dinosaur creatures I want to say river or whatever it is, just a river. And I'm a little mad you can't fight those things, because it's like, they're just there to make the place look nice. I mean, if we could fight those things, I would be just in tears. That'd be great. But then again, they do give us a giant turtle mountain to fight, so you can't be all mad. Oh. Besides that, though, graphic-wise, this game is beautiful. I don't think I have anything really to say. When it comes to facial animations, it's fine. There's nothing really lacking at all. When it comes to boss fights, they're very much well rendered. The boss fights themselves graphically are gorgeous, very immersive. They really capture the very weight that these gods have. When you're summoning gods, right, and you can kind of see how they come across, because these gods, like, one thing I will say, the summons in this Final Fantasy are very well rendered and done. Because let's say you're in the middle of an intense boss fight and you're about to die and you have the ability to summon your god. It's beautiful. You can literally see a giant wizard bearded man in the sky with his staff summon this giant bolt of lightning just to decimate any enemy that's in your way, specifically bosses, and it just decimates their health. Graphically and just world wise, it is great. That's all I can say. So the world is well done. Now let's get to mechanics. Mechanic wise, when it comes to everything, whether if it's driving or moving around, fighting, or whether if it's interaction with the world or how you handle things, I will say this: the mechanics are at most mediocre. There's nothing really over the top or different. I mean, when it comes to driving the regalia, you don't have many options. You know, either you have Ignis drive it and he's kind of like your personal taxi driver, or you drive it and you're just kind of like, the way it works, you just drive. You know, you don't have much freedom. And here's something, I get it. The Regalia is not an off-road vehicle. But if you can make the Regalia fly, well then again, I think they did make it an off-road vehicle, didn't they? They did. That's something else. Anyway, the Regalia did eventually become an off-road vehicle and a flying vehicle. Now, do you guys notice something, right? I want you to know something, right? As we're talking more and more about this game, notice how the developers constantly added more and more to this game. Now, when they added more and more to this game, it wasn't intentional. It was because of fan base wise. The fans were complaining that this needed to be added, that needed to be added. And apparently, Final Fantasy 15 basically got attacked for other things. I won't get into those just yet. But when it came to mechanic wise, the game is average. You know, nothing, I mean, when it comes to like RPG setting, whether you can have choices, it's like you can make this decision and this decision might cause this character to get this much XP, or that decision might cause this character to get that much XP. And the way quests are given, the whole quest mechanic system is also pretty average. Nothing too overcomplicated about that. I mean, there's a quest where basically the way quests work is that whether if you can go to a gas station or a chocobo area, or you can go into a what is it? How should I say? Just anyone. Basically, most of the quests that you want to specifically you yourself participate in, they don't have much, I guess you can say, weight to them. There are no side quests that are connected to the story. Mechanically wise, when it comes to the quests, each side quest is separate. There's no real heavy hitting thing for them. They're just like, oh, do this, get XP, and that's it. Those quests are surely designed in this game for just XP, and that's it. And I think that's where Final Fantasy kind of fell off, because when it came to quests, the quests never felt like they had meaning, like they had purpose, like there was any reason to actually go out and do it, unless you really needed the XP. And don't get me wrong, there were plenty of times where you really needed the XP, but because the quest had no real weight to it or depth, it came off as shallow and hollow. And because of that, people had a hard time playing the quest. A lot of people, I've noticed, apparently when it came to playing the game after beating the campaign itself, they had a crap ton of side quests left over in the end game. And because there were so many side quests that they had access to, it felt overwhelming. It felt like, God, I gotta do all this now, and I've beaten the game at level 40, and the max is like 120. Originally the max was 99, now it's 120. Now people feel like they have like, oh shit, now I might as well just do this. But of course, people had no motivation and they stopped. So mechanic wise, when it comes to quests, simple. RPG when it comes to talking, also not that over the top. It's just like small little options here, not even dialogue options, just like certain things that you could do, and that's merely it. Of course, is that one thing where you like, it's like where you, before the final battle, you can actually go into, you can actually choose to take a picture with you before you die, and that's pretty much it. That's like one little choice. So there aren't really dialogue heavy choices, nothing that really can like determine the fate of the game necessarily. You know, no like ending based dialogue questions. So quest wise, dialogue wise, overall wise, it's pretty average, almost painfully average, and I think that's also where it kind of struggled as well. It wasn't very unique, but then again, you know, it worked. But just because it works doesn't mean it's the best, if that makes sense. You know, there's always good room for change. Now that I've talked mechanics, let's talk open world. The open world, like I said, is beautiful, but to a certain extent, it just feels like a space to run around in. Now, here's my thing. I noticed this, right? In the midst of the game, you lose the Regalia to the Imperials, or to Niflheim. And I feel like the devs did this so that way you're just not driving around from point A to point B, point C, to point D, and so on and so forth with quests in the story. Because of that, it kind of makes the game kind of like slag a little bit in a way where it's just like, oh, here. One thing that the devs want to do is really immerse you in this world, and let's be honest, Destiny 2 did the same thing as well. If you remember in Destiny 2, you didn't get your what are they called? We'll just call them speeders, because that's what they basically are in Destiny, just speeders, right? I forgot the original name, but let's be honest, when you were in Destiny 2, you couldn't get your speeder until the end of the game. The reason why they did that was because they wanted the players to explore the new parts of the new game, so that way the players necessarily couldn't rush through the campaign. They wanted to basically experience the campaign, experience the new open worlds, and really explore. Here's the thing, we see that even in Final Fantasy 15 when you have your regalia taken away from you, because basically you have to run everywhere. Now you do have the option of getting a chocobo and renting it for a certain amount of days, but even at then, because of this was the devs' way of saying like, hey, we gotta find a way for the player to explore more, look around more, get involved with more things, to request, and of course expand themselves along with the world and what it has to offer. And they did that, and for me, it didn't work. Not one bit. I did not running around everywhere and constantly watching Noctis' stamina bar go down, then go back up, go down, go back up I didn't enjoy it. But I did it because, of course, story was interesting. World was, like, to a certain extent interesting. But this world, if you think about it, is to a certain extent empty. Don't get me wrong, you do have enemy encounters, whether if it's the Niflheim Imperials, whether if it's the animals, whether if it's the certain type of dungeons and quests. Besides the dungeons, besides the side quests, besides the certain Royal Arms, this place, if you think about it, if you take away all those things, to a certain extent, it does feel alive, but at the same time dead. It feels alive because there's enough things that keep you looking and keep you interested and they keep you going. Like, oh, look at those. Like, for example, right, when you're walking around through the world, or you're driving, you're constantly being taken in by the sights and the scenery and the people. Like, look at that monster, look at this monster, look at these creatures, look at that world, look at these mountains, look at that hurricane, which was that giant double-winged bird that had wings on its neck. Neck wings. The Japanese for you. Anyway, what does that mean? What does that even? How about I say that? That just sounds stupid. Anyway, besides that in itself was the game has a lot to look at and a lot to do, but there's no necessary depth. What I'm trying to say is the map just feels like space. Just space to run around and play in. And don't get me wrong, with the gameplay and how I described it, it's fluid, it's good. The combat system is fine. There are a lot of times where it just feels like open area. That's it. There's no density, right? If that makes sense. I mean, yes, you have quests, but this area necessarily is just, it's there to look pretty, not to grab you. And because of that, there were a lot of times where it's like, I'm running through the world and it's like, yeah, it looks pretty, but it's like, grass, mountains, waterfall, giant creature with an elongated neck with fangs coming out of its face, drinking water, cool. Of course, you have the occasional Niflheim guards that come down and fight you. You fight those, and you have the occasional animals that you fight, get your materials, fight those. As you can see, it gets boring and somewhat monotonous because it drags along. It's like, oh, now don't have the regalia, now I gotta run here. So, open world experience wise, it feels at that because the open world itself feels empty. It looks nice, it looks pretty, and it's beautiful. But under all that, it's just, quest, dungeon, and Royal Arm. And that's pretty much it. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the Royal Arms and some of the dungeons. The dungeons I did find a little aggravating, But I just noticed the world itself, yeah, it's beautiful and it can be fun to actually, go around in. At times it just feels just like it's just space. And that's it. There's nothing for it. But I could be wrong, and maybe I'm missing something that I've, after the time I've played, I could be overlooking. You never know. Let me know what I could be overlooking. So I've covered all those things for Final Fantasy 15. And I think when it came to development-wise, now that I covered all those things for Final Fantasy 15, when it came to gameplay, story, and graphics, mechanics, and overall experience, I'm now going to finish up the last part, which is basically the community and how this game, after a while, kind of like went up and down. So I've looked into Final Fantasy 15, right? And after playing it now with this new game plus and all its DLC and everything that they've added, there's a bunch of things they added. One, here's the thing: Final Fantasy 15 went through some allegations, not allegations, but apparently people were saying the game was sexist. Apparently because the game had an all-male cast and a protagonist, that it was sexist. And yes, I get it. They're handsome, tall, cute, Japanese pretty boys. What do you expect when it comes to Japanese, storytellers when they're male characters? But why are people getting mad that it's an all-male cast? Well, there's plenty of other Final Fantasy games that have, of course, their own female cast. You have, of course, Lightning, and other Final Fantasy games that have their own female characters that are just as strong and, oh God, I feel like anyway. And that happened. And y'all remember when there was an update where apparently you can basically I forgot that. She was that badass Storm. She was that chick that Noctis fought. She could fly in the sky, and she worked for Niflheim, and she had that giant javelin. Her. Remember how she became playable? That happened because people were saying that there weren't enough female characters to be involved in. So they made her a character to have on the team. And that was it. They made that a thing. Right? And of course, you had other things where when people were saying the game was too hard, not only did they basically upgrade the ring to high health, but they literally gave you a battle armor suit that makes you immune to everything. I'm not lying. There's a suit that you get in the game for free called the Exo Magitech suit. This suit has the literal ability to make you immune in combat until combat is over. I put this suit on, right? And I did not take an ounce of damage. When I first put this suit on, right? Noctis was the only one wearing the suit. Everyone else was fine. My current levels right now are 64. And, I think 65 because I leveled up a little bit. But Noctis at that time was the only one with the suit on. And everyone else had just typical clothes on. I stood still while everyone else fought. I did not take an ounce of damage with the suit on. I did not lose a single point or not even a centimeter. I stood still, completely still. Didn't move, didn't teleport, didn't cast any magic, didn't even summon a god, didn't do anything, didn't make any of my teammates do a certain command to attack. I just stood still and did nothing. And got no damage done to myself. Because of that, and people were complaining the game was too easy. Too hard. So the devs made it even more easy. And besides that, I think that's also where it failed. So I think here's the thing. When it comes to long development games, for example like Final Fantasy 15, the one things as a recap that made this game fail was two things. Of course, you had conflicting fans who were new, and fans of old. You have fans saying the game was too hard, and fans saying the game was too easy. And of course, you have people that are saying the game was too hard over Bayer, the fans who are saying the game was too easy. But because the game was too hard for that specific fan, the game became even more easy. And the game underwent a lot of flack for basically being sexist because of its all-male cast. It's lack of story development because you have the story separated into both a movie and an anime series, and they had callbacks to both those mediums, which didn't really help the player understand what was going on. And of course, you had the typical thing where they had switched directors, which kind of switched the narrative out completely. So you can kind of see what happens. So that's also so this is why Final Fantasy 15 flopped.